Let's try and get started in the next minute or so.
All I ask is pure water. I don't care what you do. So you're going to do it? I'm good.
Wow. Yeah, just
Cue video.
You gotta look responsible. I don't think they care. Cute video.
Let's call this Lincoln session with the City Council to order at 5:05 p.m. So welcome, everybody. This is one of two Lincoln sessions we hold each year with the city. The school district and city are unique in that we share the same constituency and the same boundaries. It allows us to do a lot of things together and be very cooperative. So we've had a great relationship with each other thanks to meetings exactly like this, and thanks to our constituency that holds all their elected officials accountable for what we do on the island. So thank you very much for your attendance. I see a much larger attendance that we normally have in school board meetings. So I hope we're doing something right. With that, I will say that the school board is very thankful to the city and the work we have done together, and we very much appreciate the things we can accomplish together, and we've got a lot to cover this evening. So I will let Bruce say a few words, and then we will hand it over to Dr. Plano to lead us through this.
All I'll say is, Ellie, could you call the roll?
Well said, Bruce.
Mayor Bruce Bassett.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Debbie Bertlin. Here. Councilmember Wendy Weicker. Here. Councilmember Jeff Sanderson.
Here.
Councilmember Dave Wiesentiner.
Here.
Councilmember Benson Wong. Okay.
Oh, no.
I think I might have missed Dan. Councilmember Dan Grouse.
I'm still here.
Sorry.
I'm still standing.
On your side. Do you want to do a roll? No roll call for you right now. Okay. Welcome, everyone. David said it well, so I really won't repeat anything that he said. I think we'll launch right into the business of the evening. We have quite a full agenda, and Gary, you're going to tee up the various topics for us here?
Yes, I will, Mr. Mayor, and I haven't seen our city manager arrive yet, but she and I have had some conversation about the interest that the city has in the data from the Healthy Youth Survey, and of course the district is very interested in what our youth are telling us about their practices and their beliefs about substances and things that could cause them some pain at times. So with that, I would invite Assistant Superintendent Rundle and Executive Director Wright to provide some highlights and an overview of this year's survey results, and then we'd open it up for some questions, potentially, and comments from the council and board.
Great. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jennifer Wright. I'm the Executive Director of Learning Services in the district. So every other year, we participate in a statewide Healthy Youth Survey. It happens in even number years, and our survey was actually given in the second week of October. The survey window is defined for us. I also told you when homecoming was, because some people believe that that might impact the results that you have there in the briefing. As we look at this, the result, or as we look at the survey, what it's supposed to do is survey students in relationship to increased risk of social and emotional injury, poor health outcomes, and cigarette, alcohol, and illegal drug use. Obviously, over the last couple of years, e-cigarettes have been added to this list, and then there's been some questions about texting and driving, which were not asked in the original surveys, but will continue to be asked. So what we've done is we've provided a selection of survey questions. These are the most important questions as identified by the Healthy Youth Organization, although there are hundreds of questions that are asked of the students. And so we've highlighted some of that as far as successes and celebrations, and then some challenges. I'm going to talk about cigarette and tobacco use, and then on into alcohol use, and then Fred will finish with the rest of the information. So if we think about alcohol or cigarette and tobacco use, there's an increase of the percentage of students at all 4 grade levels who report the community believes smoking is very wrong. So there's an increase in that, but you'll see later that the e-vape is an interesting caveat to that data. There's e-cigarette. Oh, in fact, here it goes. E-cigarette and vaping use dropped by 10% among the seniors, but the same cohort of students, so 2014 they were sophomores, 2016 they were seniors, saw no drop at all. So you can actually determine the cohorts by just going backwards in the years. There is no trend. While no trend data is available, e-cigarette and vape use on campus is approximately 8%, which is of concern to us. And then there's only between a quarter and a third of high school students surveyed believe that using an e-cigarette or vapor pen poses a great risk. So it's clear that they don't know the connection between tobacco use and e-cigs. Moving on to alcohol, the middle school students has remained historically low in as far as the drinking among middle students, which is great. Our research shows that the sooner that you can, or the longer that you can put off alcohol use in children, the better. So we've always had a low rate at our middle school. As far as high school, though, the students, the 2014 sophomores, then the 2016 seniors, so the same group of kids who reported having at least a glass or can of alcohol in the past 30 days, increased by 22%. So between their sophomore year and their senior year, there's a significant increase in alcohol use. And we know that Youth and Family Services and ourselves have been working really hard to help educate students about what's appropriate. Compared to the state, our lifetime alcohol use is less on Mercer Island. Which is good. It's still a very high number. Binge drinking at Mercer Island High School is down over the past 6 years, and actually, when you consider that this is in relationship to happen 3 weeks after homecoming, that is good data. That's great. That's great for us. Although you still don't want kids binge drinking. And then alcohol use on school property is up. It's not an issue at the middle school, but it is an issue at the high school. And then finally, Mercer Island youth do not perceive alcohol as a great risk compared to their peers across the state. So, which tells me that social drinking is more acceptable on Mercer Island than it is in other places.
When this report was last released, which would have been 2 years ago, both the school district and the city, through Mercer Island Youth and Family Services, were uncertain what the data around marijuana use was going to do, simply because of the passage of the legalization laws with 502. And so we were curious going into this year. Lots of conversation with Cindy Goodwin and myself over a number of phone calls to see what's going to happen as we go forward. So interestingly, reported marijuana use is down from 2014 to 2016 amongst 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, which is positive. However, our marijuana use continues to increase across the 3 grade levels. So as students get older, we're seeing more and more use. So we did think that there might be a spike here. When we were thinking about this 2 years ago, we're pleased with the results of where they wound up, but we're still concerned with the overall growth as students age from 6th grade on there. Another interesting point to make is that marijuana use on school property is something that we think we need to continue to monitor at the high school. And in speaking with the high school and just general observations around the district, one of our great challenges right now are the edibles. and it's no longer just the use of marijuana through inhalation through smoking, but the edibles is causing us tremendous challenges simply because they're coming in forms that do not appear to be illegal drugs. So that's a challenge we're going to face. I think our friends in the community, other community members, yourselves probably see the same. Another interesting fact is that marijuana continues to be more accessible as older students, or as students get older. I think this translates also into the slide two previous slides ago when we talked about increase in youth or use over time. Accessibility seems to be the inverse of that, which is causing us alarm there. Fortunately, Mercer Island students believe that marijuana use poses a great risk, or at least a greater risk than their peers across the state. So we are doing our diligence with the education on that. However, we need to continue to think about those. And finally, underneath marijuana and illegal drug use, I would say that the illegal drug use by the cohort of 10th grade students who took the survey in 2014, who would be our 12th graders now, the illegal drug use more than doubled, and illegal drug use among seniors at MIHS surpasses the state average. Something for us to really think about as a community, as a school district, and across the island. I think there are some great strengths, and I think we're continuing to do some tremendous things in our community, in our partnership with MIYFS. Obviously, that's the city as well as the school district. We have areas we need to continue to focus on. Relative to the state, our students are doing, I think, a really nice job, and I think our trends are going in the right direction relative to what our own expectations might be. That's probably where we need to continue to work. Thinking about the mental, social, emotional health and well-being of our students, kind of the fourth quadrant of questions that the students are asked. I would say that our students on Mercer Island schools feel more safe at school than others in the state, and that continues historically across all the bands, as you can see from 6th grade through 12th grade, which is a positive indicator. However, while students in Mercer Island schools enjoy school as much or more than others in the state, the average still hovers only around 50%. We see this bear out to some degree in our EES data that we've monitored for quite some time, as well as some other factors that, it's not where the state is, but that question always is one that we always want to probe on to see is there other qualitative data behind that could help us along. And I'd say finally that Mercer Island youth report less bullying in the past 30 days and more confidence in the school of almost always or often trying to stop bullying compared to peers in the state. Again, credit to our schools and our counselors and others who help our students to feel safe and work against those bullying behaviors as they go through. So I certainly know that Mercer Island Youth and Family Services I've been part of, as well as other administrators, other staff members, the Healthy Youth Initiative that's been very strong, supported by or led by MIYFS and a number of community members right here who have been part of that. I think this data is really helpful, as it will help us continue to think about the road ahead, where we need to set our goals, and our roundtable conversations can only get better from that as we target specific areas. So on the whole, compared to the state, I think our students are certainly healthy. They're growing, they're maturing, they're heading off, but we have areas that we need to continue to grow. And Cindy Goodwin and I will continue those conversations as we hold monthly conversations with one another to address various issues. And this will certainly be one that I know we'll be talking about a lot as she smiles as well in the coming weeks and months. So with that, we'll open it up to questions or comments.
Hello. Hi. Thank you very much for presenting this. I had a question about the first page about student participation. It appears that for fall of 2016, the rate of participation has gone down, and as it goes down over time from 6th grade to 12th grade as well. And I was wondering how that plays into any concerns about validity or as we see trends across time, if we see a trend in the rate of participation going down, how do we relate that to the trends of other items going up or down? And if you could elaborate on that.
Excellent point
Thank
there.
you.
In fact, Cindy had forwarded on, because I think she looked at that as well and had a similar conversation. Jennifer and I have had that same conversation. The publishers, they really look for 70% or greater participation for the results to be, as they quote, probably or would be probably representative of the students. If you're in that 40 to 69% participation, your results may be representative. So if you think about what you just quoted there, Director Drinkwater, we're well within that band for our 6th graders, our 8th graders, and our 10th graders. It's our 12th graders. I think we have to think about how do we target them so that they're actually taking the survey. We ran into this last year when we started with the Life Track, where we're doing the graduate surveys, and we had low participation rates, so we made a change this year. In fact, they're taking it next week in a very specific time. We may need to think about that going forward in 2 years with our seniors. Yeah,
It is done at a specific time.
but it
Yeah.
doesn't guarantee that they are
Actually
doing it. And so
Right.
I think we have to think about that component as well to
Yeah.
make sure that they actually complete it.
Okay, and do we have the, at the state level, what the participation rate is?
I haven't seen that. Have you? I haven't seen that data yet, but we could probably look at that.
Okay, I think that would be interesting too.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So again, thank you. I think I have to go to me, what's the most basic question, that is, which of these is keeping you awake at night? Which are the ones that you're targeting for action, for conversation with parents as well as with the students, so that we can see the trends or the reversal of trends that we would like?
And me personally, it's probably, I could probably identify, which of ones in each of the 4 quadrants. Part of me always goes to that social emotional piece, because some of those other components I find, can oftentimes follow those students. So when I look at, I don't know if there's one in particular that I could comment on tonight, but I would say that those social emotional questions continue to be the ones that keep me up, thinking about how do we maintain the mental and social health of our students so that perhaps they're using some of these other drugs, alcohol, tobacco as masks for something deeper. So that's what keeps me up. I don't know.
Yeah, I think what I look at is the lifetime numbers, right? So how many kids are experimenting is really what it gets to, as opposed to the students that are, in the last 30 days I've done that. But if you look at the lifetime alcohol use, that means that those kids have tried it. And that as a parent and as a school district administrator, those keep me up at night.
I would say for me, when I look at the report about school being enjoyable, enjoyment of school. As students move through the system, they appear to like school less. So what is it we're doing that's causing students to not like being where they are? That's bothersome to me. And the depression slide is bothersome to me. That at high school, roughly anywhere from 20 to 20+% of our students are expressing that they are feeling depressed. And while I'm very concerned about the state average, that I find that extraordinarily high, it is very concerning to me that we have young people that are exhibiting and sharing that they are not well. They don't feel well. They don't seem to like school as much, and they're expressing a feeling of depression. So those are 2 areas of concern.
Sorry. With respect to the questions on bullying, do they track cyberbullying at all, or are you guys keeping information about that?
We'd have to do an item analysis in terms of how they break that out, but I don't believe that the questions break it out in terms of cyberbullying versus, physical bullying. So I think it's couched under a larger umbrella in this particular study.
Is that? Do you have any idea if that's a concern, or is that becoming a problem among the students?
It certainly happens. Is it more or less than physical bullying or harassment, kind of verbal harassment? I'm not sure. Much of it happens off campus, right? So happens in the hours in which they are not at school, which then brings to the point that it's a larger community issue as well that needs to be addressed. It is certainly happening.
When we do know that bullying has occurred, either informally or formally, we take action. And it is not as common to have cyberbullying always show up, right? So it does occur in some cases. And one just living in this world can't stop the social media connections that our kids have. So it's part and parcel of their everyday life. But it is not a prevalent or a more often than not type of situation.
And, just the venues or the different available applications that cut across from Snapchat to, some hangouts or in the family house and all these, strange places that, my own son at home that I'm aware of. It's so hard to monitor where those are. And also then it really relies upon the students to come forward. It's not something that's oftentimes seen. So appreciate the question.
How concerned are you on the current illegal drug use, not including alcohol, tobacco, or marijuana? It looks like it's gone up 2 to 3 times in the high school, from 5 to 13% over the years, and is now well above state average. Is that real, or is that not real, or what's your feeling?
What's that? Yeah, confidence interval is about 5%. I think it is probably real, and I think that's why we pointed it out in the actual report. That is a concern. Not only the growth, but how quickly it's grown as well over time. I think that's a certain concern because, again, that gets into all of the prescription medications and other things that we know students are also experimenting with or using as stimulants. For studying, which could mask, going back to Dr. Plano's point around depression or anxiety about school and performance. I think all of those tie together. One of the points that Chris Harnish has made over time, and I know impressed upon Jennifer as a mom when her own son was going through, but the longer we can keep students from trying something, from that first experimentation, the better chance we have to keep them, on a healthier track throughout their life. The statistics, and Cindy could probably quote them, but the earlier students experiment, the riskier it is for them, or the higher risk that student is for addiction or lifetime problems with drug and alcohol and tobacco use.
I had a question about the two sort of high-risk behaviors of pot smoking and binge drinking. So they're both at about 20%, the other's 23%. Do they correlate those two? So is that the same group of students just really partying, or is it saying that 50% of our students or 43% of our students are participating in some form of high-risk behavior?
We do not know. The surveys are anonymous, and also it's a kind of there's in essence 3 different sets of questions. There's a core set of questions that every student gets, and then there are sets of questions that only half the students get. And so while we could compare the two, we wouldn't know if we were comparing the same child. Yeah. So I was thinking about it in terms of, if you look at Dr. Plano's comments about depression, if you go back in the years, I think it's 22%, then 21%, then 18%. We don't know if those are the same kids or if they're a different set of kids. So that 18%, some of them got help, and then it's a new batch. So the anonymousness of the survey makes it impossible to get to that level. Yeah.
Question, up in the summary section, before we get to the tables, under marijuana and illegal drug use, you have written here, it's the first bullet, reported marijuana use is down. However, marijuana use continues to increase across the 3 grade levels. And you mentioned that too in speaking. I was kind of confused by that. Do you just mean that as kids get older, more of them use?
Yes.
It would be the same as with alcohol or any of the other activities, really.
So it's down from the previous assessments or the previous times that we've done the survey. However, it continues to increase as students get older or as they matriculate through the system.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, but I guess calling it out makes it seem as if that might be a different trend than any of the other behaviors when it's actually in line with other behaviors. So
True.
that just threw me off a little bit. But thank you.
Yep.
Other questions?
One last question on bullying. Just wanted to see how you guys made sense of. It says so 70% of the time, I feel like someone at the school or a teacher is always aggressive in helping stop it. Does that mean that 30% of the time a teacher or someone at the school is aware of it and is not aggressive about stopping? That I didn't understand.
It's hard to know because it's a compilation leading into it. It's not necessarily a specific item that's asking that direct question, so it's hard to know what that other 30. Yeah, so it's several questions that correlate to that. So it's hard to say if that's 30% who don't feel that way. So I don't know exactly, but we could infer that 30% feel that some sort of action isn't being taken. The degree to which that, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, guys. For the recording, can we make sure we speak into the microphones rather than facing the presenter? Because we're missing some of you guys. Thanks.
So before we leave the topic, I want to just say a few words to the city. Thank you for your commitment to mental health. It is not a common concept that a city would devote resources for the mental health of students or its citizens. And often people think of the city government providing basic services, streets and garbage collection and water and so on, but you've made a commitment to the well-being of the community, and it is not only appreciated, it is a valuable part of our curriculum and our program. So without the mental health piece, we would really not be able to deliver the kinds of quality programs in that sense. So thank you, and I hope that you continue to find ways to keep that as part of your mission and your work.
I wanted to second that. It's been a tremendous asset to the school district that the City Council continues to fund the mental health counselors that we have in each one of our schools, and the state does not provide this funding, and without it, I believe that our students would be at higher risk, and they're all our children, and so thank you.
Thinking we're wrapped up on this topic and time to move on. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I see demographic study 2017 update is the next.
Right.
Next
So
topic.
as Ty is getting teed up there on the screen, we've benefited from Dr. Les Kendricks' work. Dr. Kendrick has been with us for since 2008, and as Ty, before he dives into the work, I just want to share an insight. When I looked at Dr. Kendrick's 2008 projection for 2017, he was very, very close. He was within about 30 students. And this is before children were obviously born who are already in the system. So his metrics and his methodology and the model that he built was pretty effective. So we're here to share some highlights with you about the school impact. So I'll turn this over to Ty Bergstrom, who is our Executive Director of Finance, Chief Financial Officer. Ty?
Good evening. So just kind of start off really quick. Les's work focused on... Sorry. Good evening. Les's work focused on several inputs. One of the main inputs Les looked at was population growth in the county. And the Office of Financial Management at the state level predicts that over the next about 8 years, we'll be getting about another 90,000 people in King County. Traditionally, Mercer Island represents about 1.12 to 1.17 percent of the King County population. So as that grows, we'll also, begin to experience growth within the city. Let me see if I can expand that. Les's forecast for the next 3 years and then the next 8 years predicts approximately 2,000 to 2,500 increased individuals living within the boundaries of Mercer Island. Part of what's driving that is additional home sales. As members of the community start to age, the baby boomers that are empty nesters start wanting to consolidate their homes. They'll start putting there'll be more homes in the market, and we'll see increased turnover. Additionally, increased housing density is being planned for Mercer Island, so that will help drive. Now, for each 100 occupied houses, there's about 46 students that are within Mercer Island. So all of these have kind of contributed to Wes's projections. So within the next 3 years, we're looking at approximately 150 to 200 additional students. Over the next 8 years, we're looking at 200 to 250 students. So some growth, not incredible growth, but that does present some challenges in the next few years regarding housing capacity.
And to put these numbers in some perspective, for those of you around the table who have been on Mercer Island for 30 or more years, or you went to school in Mercer Island here and you graduated in the 1970s or 80s, to put these numbers in perspective, the school population in 1976-77 was over 5,000 students. So we were about 5,500 students. We don't even reach that number, even with more units available because of family size, and people who have lived here are staying. But the group of people who moved here in the 1960s had kids, and those kids populated our schools. So we don't see us reaching that high water mark. And then 10 years later, in 1986, Mercer Island District lost 2,000 students. So we closed several schools. And there were 5 elementaries at the time, and we closed 2 of them. There were 2 junior highs at the time, and we closed 1 of them. So it's important for us to keep our eye on these numbers so that we're able to ensure adequate facilities and plan for those facilities as we know that students will be showing up. We don't predict, and Les and I talked about a big dip again for a whole variety of reasons. We don't expect that we're going to lose 1,000 or 2,000 students or the numbers of students that we lost at one time. But we are going to see troughs and ebbs and flows in our school population. It's just a natural, normal demographic in a healthy community like ours.
May I add a little bit more? Yeah. And just for everybody's benefit, this is something that we teed up, I think, back in November. The demographer came to the school board and presented how he did the studies, and it was an opportunity for the school board then to ask a bunch of what if you consider these things, and there are about 10 questions. And then I think the district also published in the Reporter on the headlines asking the public to ask their questions, and so I think you received maybe 15 emails. And the demographer also took into account that feedback and presented like a 76-slide deck on it. It was extremely thorough. He's been doing this for 25 years. Let's see. And the other thought is, let's see, I think he gives you a low, a medium, and a high scale. And I think this whole demographic projection can get political. There's people who want more density. There's people who want less density. And we need to keep in mind he really doesn't have a horse in the race. His horse in the race is being as accurate as possible. And so that's kind of helpful for us to know, too. But the interesting thing for me, looking at the low to the high range, think 8 years out, or is that 10 years out? I can't tell.
It's 10 years.
That range from the low to the high is almost twice as large as the range that he did last time because of some unknowns in our future. And so that's kind of a challenge for the district to figure out transportation, figure out operating budgets, as well as facilities. But it's an exercise that we need to do, and we did.
And I would also add, Les has said back in 2008 and continues to say there's a very high correlation to student enrollment on Mercer Island and King County birth. So when people have families in King County, there's a correlation to moving to Mercer Island. There's a very high correlation when you do a statistical analysis. When I looked at his alternate method back when Les was here in 2008, and I said a few minutes ago that he was within 30 or 50 students, the method that he used was predicated on King County growth. So because we sit in the middle of the lake, just a few miles from King County, we are affected by all of the things happening just a few miles on that land. So as we watch this community, the Puget Sound grow, it is likely that we're going to continue, and we think slower growth because the community is already built up. There isn't more land, and I've been thinking about in the future as I move into retirement one day soon, that potentially there'll be a school on a floating barge. Potentially they'll have a school on a barge that they'll have to then move from point to point because there is no more land to build schools. And it's not likely that a future board, is going to condemn land or that we're going to give up parks. So where would we build more schools? So that's information about what I think you were interested in. So are there questions that Ty or I or board members potentially who might be able to answer questions?
Gary, the natural question that comes from this is sort of the now what? What does the information mean to the board in terms of how you now respond to what you see here? Has that question been considered yet?
Well, yes. To me, and I believe to the board, as we've looked at capacity, we have enough capacity for the next several years. So we have the. When we go out, that's 2026. Is that what I'm looking at?
Yeah.
So yeah, we probably will have to add some capacity at the high school. We will our variable capacity at elementary is with portables, and presently we have portables, but we haven't used them all. We have a portable pad at Northwood, but we haven't purchased the portables. So when we look at elementary population, we have the capacity, if not yet the buildings. We have 2 portables or 4 classrooms to add yet in the future. So I feel good about that. What makes me stay up at night is the fact that at the high school, particularly in the gym area, the gymnasium, we don't have enough gym space. And so it's the board, at the previous board, did study what would it cost to add another gymnasium to the high school in a 2-story configuration. And when we predicted out several years, we're talking in the neighborhood of about $10 million. But we'll probably need a few more classrooms and another gym in order to deliver the quality of program that we have at the high school. I think we'll be fine with the other grade levels. Again, Islander Middle still is only half rebuilt, so it has another half yet to go. So there's possibility as future boards look at the data that they might consider finishing that piece with an addition of a few classrooms, potentially. So this doesn't alarm me. I don't think we ought to think about finding a barge in a school quite yet. But I think that it's something that we should be keeping our eye on and refreshing this every few years because we are in a very dynamic time in this region on jobs and growth and population.
It is worth noting that Mercer Island is growing slower than King County as a whole, so we're under that. And most of this model is driven by birth rates, nothing else really. The regulations or anything else. Most of the model is driven by birth rates. Les did consider density increases, zoning changes in it. I think people in the community raised light rail potential in here. There's some differences and issues around what's predictable and what is not. I think the impact of things like light rail are not predictable and really don't show up in a meaningful way within the next 10 years. But other things were there, and can be utilized. But mainly birth rates. He's said time and time again that King County birth rates have really driven most of this model.
So I'm curious. We have the facilities, but the population is going to go up. Does that mean class size is going to be a big issue going forward? Or will that be spread out?
Well, we may be regulated by the state in how many students we can put in a class. So to that degree, we then might have to look at more portable housing or potentially a school number 7. So all of those things we don't know yet. The legislature hasn't. We'll get to that topic in a few minutes, but that's still an unknown factor. If we had classes of 17, then across the spectrum, then yes, we would be needing more buildings. Yes.
I think I'd also say, right now we still have an open construction bond project, and I think the public expects us to be focused on closing out those construction bond projects and not losing track of that mission there. And then I think, the next would be a facility study analysis in terms of longevity of the buildings. But I think first and foremost, let's make sure that we're putting our attention on closing out these construction projects.
Let's not forget the real long-term planning. I don't know what's going to happen in 30, 40 years, and neither does a demographer. But the land on Mercer Island is relatively limited, so we're constrained. And in as much as we can see eye to eye with City Council on that, that would be helpful.
We've already done our town center code. That one's baked, and our residential code is in process. And if you have thoughts on that, now is a good time to weigh in with our planning commission and soon with our council. So, but I think to spoil the ending, I don't hear any push for greater density, and so I don't think there are surprises there that are coming out of that.
My wife weighed in on my behalf to all of you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Ty. Much appreciated for this. Let's move to the legislative update on school funding in McCleary. Is that right, Gary?
Yes, it is. You're absolutely correct. So, Ty, you're still at the podium. Why don't you give us an overview? And things, by the way, are changing really by the day or by the hour in some cases. We're coming close to the end of the session, and I don't think we can see the finish line yet as it relates to school matters. I think there's still a lot of murkiness. So Todd's going to give us a sort of a high-level overview of where we think we are at this point in the process.
Well, where we think we are in the process right now with the legislature is there's no movement. We have 4 proposals for funding. We have the governor's proposal, the Senate Democrats, the Senate Republicans, and the House Democrats. And each one has vastly different means of funding schools and vastly different ways of how they get the funding to us. The numbers that we see from OSPI, the Office of Financial Management, the individuals who are the staffers who are helping to put together the bills, the numbers that we see in terms of funding are incredibly different. So it's very hard to figure out where exactly we're going to wind up. So at this moment, we can't. There's been estimates as to what the impact will be with certain taxes. The Senate Republican plan, if their levy tax goes through, it's about on average, it'd be about another $1,200 per home in Mercer Island for property tax. there's a $25 per metric ton of carbon dioxide or carbon emission tax, which would equate to about 22 cents a gallon. So there's increases. There's a 1% increase in B&O taxes, which would affect a lot of over 170,000 B&O taxpayers across the state. So there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of hard decisions that are being made right now.
So go ahead. We are in a budget process where we have now projected about $1.5 million in reduction for this next budget. So from current spending, we're reducing by $1.5 million, and we have recently returned to the school funding, to the school staffing allocations. 1 teacher per building, so roughly 6 FTE, have gone back into our classroom teacher positions. So we haven't arrived at the end yet. We are still. It's a moving target, and it's a machine in motion. So it seems every few weeks we're making changes and iterations. Next week, as you all know, is the Breakfast of Champions event, where the Schools Foundation is hopeful that it can raise its goal of $1.1 million. I believe that's its goal. But with that goal, we're still at a $1.5 million reduction. If they exceed the goal, then we will be able to restore some of the reductions back, in addition to whatever the state does. So if we have good news coming from the state, we would move into a restoration phase. So all of those pieces won't get finalized until much later in the spring. And there was a thought I had that just left me. Debbie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. My question basically comes, if there's essentially 4 different options, does the district have a preference? And does that then turn into a call to action to the community? Because we know that our community is really good, at expressing itself, particularly to regional and state officials. I wouldn't be referencing I-90 or anything, but so what I'm wondering is if you've got different plans out there, does the school district have a point of view, and what can we, as concerned parents and residents, do to help support the kind of decisions being made in Olympia that are going to benefit the kids?
Do you want to start? I have a thought. Go ahead.
In each of the plans, there are pros and there are minuses. I don't know if we specifically have one that we prefer above the other. There are certain ones put forward by the Senate that we do not like. The Senate Republican plan has an incredible amount of strings attached to it that would severely limit our ability to work with our teachers and to work with community. There would be no levy collections in 2019. So that would hamper us, that would hamstring us financially. So there are pros and cons, but there are also a lot of issues to work out.
I think one of the messages, if I were in your shoes, to share with the legislature is to leave our local levy alone, is to let the taxpayers decide whether to tax themselves. That would enrich what the state believes has been the gold standard. Because the Cleary, let's assume a Cleary is a gold standard. Well, then let the people in each community tax themselves to go above that standard. And that's an important message that I would, that I believe in, that I would promote. I am promoting, because otherwise it forces communities who so believe in education to not be able to raise money in order to improve the quality. And I just don't think it's undemocratic to me. Small d.
It's on the very complicated side, in my opinion. There's a lot of things in motion here, and one of them is how much it costs to educate a student on Mercer Island versus elsewhere, and the answer is not much different, and it costs more to educate a student in Seattle by far. It costs more to educate a student on the eastern Washington side of the state by a fair amount. And so it really is very complicated, and there is no simple answer. We are not inefficient. We are not spending way too much money. In fact, we're pretty much on par with all districts around us, a little more or a little less. So the where you get the money from is one thing, and what you put it toward is another thing, and everybody's interested in hanging out strings one way or the other, and I hope they find some stable system to do it. But the support of the schools, United States wide, is about the most complicated and intricate thing among all the states that exists. So all I can say is actually Washington has a fairly equal, even pre-McCleary way of funding the schools compared to most other states. Let's say Michigan, where you can have one district that gets half as much money per student as another and can't afford to fix their roofs. It's not the case in Washington State. So McCleary and none, it's very complicated. I don't really know what you could, unless you want to really get into it, what you can talk to the legislators about, other than we would like to fund our school system so we can make it run well. And we can go and go about our business of being one of the best systems in the state.
I think what we have here on the screen, too, that many in our community have been promoting, which is to fully fund basic education, ensure that districts are not harmed in any way so that our funding doesn't go down, and also not harming critical social services in the process are very important points. So I think if anyone were interested in writing to their legislators, and many of the ones that represent us are in agreement with those things up there. It's really maybe a broader reach that we need to have to shout out fully fund education. But the words that are on the screen, which are on board docs, are great. Well said about what our priorities are, I believe.
So to pick between the 3 plans or 4 plans that are available, kind of the 3 biggest metrics are, number one, how much is it are we getting per student? So today we're about middle of the pack or so. What will it look like in the future under any plan? How much do you get per student? The second item would be where the revenue source is. What does that cost to community members to arrive at that plan? So how is the revenue sharing occurring between Eastern and Western Washington? Is this a property tax? Is this a capital gains tax? All those different metrics. How much does it cost per individual in the community? And then in particular, a Mercer Island individual.
But we're only in the middle of the pack because of the local funding,
and
not
then,
because of the
that's
state
right.
funding.
And then number 3 would be, how much local control do you have around this? How do we think about our cost of living increases? How do we think about being able to apply it to programs that are important for our district that might not be important for another district? And what percentage of that budget is under local control? Because as Ty said, currently there's a lot of strings attached on any money that would come into our school system and funding per student. And so that makes things more complicated for us to maintain a unique Mercer Island standard of education. That's what we as a community value.
Yeah, and I'd also add that, this is a political process, as everyone realizes, and part of that is the potential redefinition of basic education, because the charter is to fully fund basic education, and people have different interpretations of what basic education means. And in today's society, with very intense global competition, there's just an article out today about how it is, in fact, tougher for millennials. A third of young adults aged 24 to 35 are living with their parents still, and et cetera. But in this environment, I believe we really have to prepare students for success after high school, whether that's college or whether that's immersion in career or whether that's, a gap year. But to do that, we have a 7-period high school, and that's not funded. But that is critical to maintain, in my opinion. So there's lots of details here that will not come out if you look strictly at what the state funds and what the state defines as basic education.
sorry, people have sort of touched about with the school board finding it beneficial to have a joint letter of some sort with the city council, touching on the points that are outlined. I mean, would that make sense and be of some help?
Let's see. Remind me of that question, because I'm going to go down 3 things here and then hopefully circle back.
No.
So I wanted to touch on 3 things. One is we only overlap with 3 legislators out of about 150. So we have 3 legislators that are going to listen to us, and it's going to take a lot more to solve this problem. Number 2, I think one of the best things we have done in the past and need to continue to do is just educate our community about the complexity of school funding, and also try to boil it down to something people can understand without having to get a PhD in school funding. And it almost requires that because it's so darn complicated. And something that our Dean Mack, a former CFO, had done was kind of created a pie chart. And it showed that, how much of the money came from federal, how much from our local levies, et cetera, and how we ranked statewide. And so for federal and state, I believe we ranked about 293rd out of 296 school districts. We're on the bottom of the bucket because that money is distributed based on free and reduced lunch and need and stuff. So we receive very little, and this is all per capita per student. When you figure in our local levies, we get to about 209th out of 209th out of about 300 school districts. So we're now at the bottom third. And that's with our residents approving our M&O levies and with our grandfathered in rate of 37%, which is great. But we're only at 209th. And it's only through our PTA and through our schools foundation that people contribute, so that we raise to about 153rd out of 296 school districts. So we get to the middle of the pack, but yet we're one of the highest performing school districts. And so that's something we need to continue to communicate to our community, that we are not a rich district. And it's because of those donations, it's because of the PTAs, and it's because of passing these local levies that we're able to get to that 50 percentile. So, and then third is next week the PTA advocacy is addressing this. They're having a forum on school funding, and the MIEA is there to present. The superintendent, I think, is going to make a presentation. David D'Souza, our president of the school board, is going to make a presentation. Tana Sen will be there, as well as Lisa Wellman, and also the Schools Foundation. So it allows us to kind of look at the complexities of these through all these different lenses, which is really important because it is political. And so in terms of that letter,
I realize it would have to be broader.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. We're thinking about it, and I think one of the things we did was went back to Ty and to Gary and said, can you boil down the Senate plan and the Democratic plan and figure out how it impacts? And there's some weird numbers that really didn't tie out correctly on some of those proposals. So it's really difficult to pick a winner, and they're also changing. So
what Ralph says is exactly accurate. I think is right on target. I just want to add that our 3 legislators are very well aware and very skilled in this particular area of knowledge. And I really do trust them. And one of them may be otherwise occupied temporarily, but they do all know.
But I would say that Senator Wellman, in her first year, passed a very significant bill. She sponsored the levy restoration, the levy cliff, for the additional year. So being a freshman senator, she was able to muster political clout, which I find just extraordinary. So it may be that we could arm her or others with information that will help build a coalition, which is what obviously we need to happen in Olympia. And Ty, by the way, will also be present at that. It's next Thursday?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
West Mercer.
West Mercer at 7.
7 o'clock. So any other questions about school finance, school funding? Yes.
That whole levy swap thing, is that still in play?
With
Where rich districts would sort of give and then it spreads out?
It's a feature of some of the...
That's the main focus of the Senate Republican plan, is that they tax every district the same amount across the state. Every home would be taxed the same rate. So you have districts like Seattle, which have very high property values. That money would then be spread out across the state. So King County would essentially fund the majority of the state of Washington.
And that's still high on that list.
Yeah.
Yes, and we were we as Mercer Island was named. We were named in a Seattle Times Education Forum article, and it said communities like Seattle and Mercer Island and Bellevue will fund Yakima and Yelm and other communities that don't have the property rich communities that exist here.
That's only partially true because, let's say, farmland isn't taxed at 100%. We can go on and on.
Which is a great point. That would be another political strategy in being able to tax everyone more fairly. So, any other questions or comments about budget, school finance? I know we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg. Okay, great.
Well, and next on the agenda, I see interlocal agreement sports fields. I know I heard from a staff member earlier that we were pushing that off from this meeting, but I don't know that is that accurate. Are we, because the school board hadn't taken it up yet? That was what I would.
Yes, that's true. So,
okay.
I think Julie, do you want to say a few comments or? Right, you settled the baseball.
No.
Oh, no, we're talking about the ILA, the interlocal agreement with.
One thing that came up would really be helpful for you. One thing that came up from the public, which would be helpful if you could settle or explain to us, is they said that you've chosen this organic infill for your next turfing project, and the public was suggesting we talk to you about why you chose it and what your thinking, your thought process was, and anything you could help us with.
An organic infield. I'm looking at
infill.
The cork. Oh, the cork.
Yeah.
We are studying the issue. We're still studying the issue of using cork as an alternative to the crumb rubber. So we're still down that road. We haven't finalized that.
Okay, so you haven't, because it was suggested to us that you had made a final decision.
Well, that's the plan, but we haven't finalized it. It hasn't gone out to bid. It's not a final decision at this point. So there's mixed research on whether crumb rubber does have a cancer-causing effect on certain individuals. There's still the jury being out. Cork is a fairly new replacement, and we'd be interested in how that particular material is lasting with respect to use and sustainability over time. We have a lot of metrics that we've used and we must use with the crumb rubber, and we have lots of history with how well it can handle the impacts and the amount of use that we've given it. We don't know yet enough about the cork to determine if that is viable. So I see my staff nodding their heads. I am saying the correct statements that we're planning on the cork use, but we haven't finalized, we haven't landed on that decision.
What's your time frame for that, Gary?
I think it's 19 for Islander. It's not this summer.
Will be the stadium.
The stadium. Yes.
The following summer. So when will you make the decision, do you think?
We are out for pricing right now, and Cork is.
Can you go ahead and step up?
So why don't you come to the microphone? And we are in the midst of. You'd be on TV.
Didn't know you're giving your presentation.
So we'll be returfing the stadium field this summer. We are going out for pricing. It's actually the design architect has the design done. It's out for pricing right now. Cork is being priced as an alternate. We've done quite a bit of research, reached out to several different districts up and down the West Coast. We've had great reviews back on it. It's a little bit dependent on the application. the exposure of the field to direct sunlight. If there's shaded areas, things like that could impact it. If the field has a crown to it, the drainage system also has an impact. Our stadium is really a perfect perfect location for that use. So we're hopeful that the pricing comes back in a positive place, so we can go ahead and put that in.
So, just so I understand that, so you said that the shading makes a difference. So if it is, like for example, Island Crest Park, where you've got a lot of trees, is that would, from your research, that's
the risk? Well, and I don't know the sun patterns at Island Crest Park. What I can tell you is the one problem that we heard from a high school up north, their grandstand shaded the southern side of the field, so it reacted a little differently in the frozen in the frozen time of the year. It didn't thaw as quickly as obviously the side in the northern side that got the sunshine. So it's all about the drainage. That's what it boiled down to is the drainage. So.
As long as we're quizzing you, the cork is with the shock pad?
Well, we have chosen to put the shock pad underneath. You could put the cork down without the shock pad. We've chosen to put the shock pad down. The high school stadium gets so much use. We struggled keeping that field in compliance through the life of the field, so we want to ensure that we can keep the safety levels up.
And Tony, correct me. Didn't we when the turf field was first put in at around 2001 or so, it didn't have a shock pad, and then we put the shock pad in.
No, at this point we do not have a shock pad.
Don't have a shock pad. Okay.
Right.
So when you're speccing the crumb rubber, are you also including a shock pad with that?
We are speccing a shock pad no matter what the infill is. We're going to be putting a shock pad in, just because we've shown over the last two fields that over the course of the life of the fields that we struggle keeping the Gmax levels at an acceptable point. So, and by putting that shock pad in, guarantees that you will meet the Gmax levels without any infill with the shock pad. So, and that shock pad will last. As of the information we have, the shock pads will last 3 different field replacements. So it's
30.
And so are you? I forgot my question. I'm sorry.
Can you skip the infill?
I think
just ask.
You know what? I'm thinking it sounds like our staff's doing research, and sounds like they're going to have to make their decision pretty darn soon, and hopefully maybe you can share this stuff offline, because we're getting a little bit off topic there.
No, I mean this is important because we went through 2 hours of public testimony and discussion and a fair amount of it, and so I mean these types of. I think it's important we have an opportunity to ask you these questions, because that's what we're here for.
The only issue is, Dan, it is not on your agenda. It's not part of the sports field ILA unless I've missed that. So it isn't on the topic. Our board could discuss it because it's their regular meeting, and we can do anything we want in a regular meeting. So I think, to be fair, it's really not something that we had planned for. And without being the...
No, and thank you very much to Tony for coming up on the spot and giving us some information. So that's much appreciated.
Mayor, if you don't mind, if maybe Gary and I can work together and bring back some information to the council on what the district decides.
Okay, guys, I'm sorry, one last. Do you use that cooperative that we were told about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have. Yes. All right.
School bus cameras?
Yep. So, Dave Bynum is here, and I hope you found the information as interesting as I did. The number of citations that we give and the location of the citations. So Dave is here to walk us through two quarters. We have the last quarter of last year and the first quarter of this year.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. This should be a little lighter than the discussions have been so far. This is actually an opportunity to bring in some revenue rather than to spend it. Although I hope none of you have encountered a citation yet. So this first report, this is done by American Traffic Solutions, the company that we got in partnership with, and this partnership started at the first of the year and at the end of August, first day of school, and so we're about 8 months into this. Of note here is this represents 33, right down here, 33 citations given out over a period of 85 active school days, down there at the bottom, over a 20-week period of time. This is an interesting map. It shows the cluster of where the citations were issued, and the main reason that it's on the north end is because that's where the cameras were placed on buses that serviced mostly in the north end area. American Traffic Solutions did a study. I gave them a listing of all of our bus stops and locations, and they did a study, traffic study and flow, and they determined that the buses they recommended to put these cameras on, and they serviced mostly in this north end area. And so we're really finding that this is, it's true based on past studies of drivers turning in their reports, either what we call a windshield report. You just see someone going through your stop paddle, or actually turning in a citation to the police department over the past several years, and most of them were occurring in this general area. So it's holding pretty true to what we thought it would be. This next page just shows the time of day that most of the events are occurring, the citations are being issued. And as we would, you might expect, most of them are happening in the afternoon routes, between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I suppose, I'm not really sure why, but that also stands true with what we have experienced over the past years. And then this graph here just shows the days of the week, and this was for the first period, August through January, when it was pretty even throughout the week that these citations were being recorded and issued. Then if we take a look at the most current report, January through April, it's real similar. There were 25 citations issued over 59 school days. But the map shows a different story, which I think is very interesting. People are getting the hang of it. They're understanding that we have cameras on buses, and so these are the hot spots, which we knew they would be. Lots of traffic in those areas during the time that our routes are on the road, and so this isn't unexpected at all. So it's encouraging to see that people are understanding that the cameras are there, and they're at least the locations have been reduced dramatically to where the violations are occurring. This again shows the time of day. Again, it's pretty much in the afternoon hours on our routes, and what that tells me as the Director of Transportation is that's an opportunity for me to be reminding my staff that this is the time of day when they need to be extra careful, extra vigilant, to go through all of our stop procedures correctly, all of our protocols, and make sure that kids are taught and trained about bus safety and crossing safety and all those kinds of things, because that's when the real danger happens, is in the afternoon and at the bus stop. That's when most of the accidents happen. And then this is also pretty interesting. It shows that actually in this past quarter, the early in the week there weren't very many events, but by the time you get toward the end of the week, and especially by Friday, now we're starting to get a lot of people running their paddles, and our drivers aren't doing anything any differently. I don't know of any other reason other than maybe people are getting in a hurry or forgetful, or I'm not really sure what it is, but it's kind of an interesting graphic. And that's really the report from them for this year. I'll just say that it's really hard to make any real determinations based on just a few months of this. We will be getting together with American Traffic Solutions this summer to review all of this year and what has happened, and they'll be making recommendations to us whether we should add more cameras to other buses or whether we should move them to other locations, other routes, if we should change bus stops just to make them safer, all that sort of thing. So, but we haven't even been in this a year yet, so we really can't make any real conclusions.
So, Dave, do you have the numbers of how many incidents occurred that resulted in 33 or 25 citations?
I don't have that number because it's hundreds.
And that's really a point that I want the council and the board to appreciate, is there's a fairly high level of scrutiny that the police officer has to go to once he or she views the violation in order for it to be a clear violation. So there may have been lots of other instances which our drivers would report and say that there were violations of the stop arm. So having said that, I really want to thank the council. It was really the council, with your authority to issue the ordinance, that permits the police department to issue the citation in order to get people to pay attention and drive differently and better and safer. So thank you for that. So when you think about these nearly 90 citations that reached that level, there were many more violators that just didn't reach that threshold. So it is a continuing area of concern. And given the streets and the patterns that we have and the meandering streets without sidewalks and so on, it is concerning to us and to you.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah, any question. So this is one of my favorite things that we do, and I just want to say thank you so much for putting that together. And I know that you worked with Commander Jokinen to get it off to a really fast start before the school year, so fantastically done, and thank you very much. A couple of questions. One, do we have any risk now that people are getting it? Although I did notice most of them are in mine and Dan's neighborhood, so we'll see about that. Is there any, my truck doesn't go that fast. Is there any risk that the company is going to decrease the number of cameras since it's a revenue share model? Would there be a risk that they say, okay, we've sort of gotten what we would have gotten out of Mercer Island, we're going to now move to another community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know the answer. I did ask them if they intended to add more cameras this year, and they said that they were considering it and that we would have a review this summer, and they might actually put some more cameras on. We're at about 20% of our fleet now with cameras, but then these buses do double duty, so each bus that has a camera, there's 5 buses, can drive 3 routes a day, so they travel quite a bit of the area. Yeah. They indicated that they were considering putting more on, and there's no conversation with me about taking them off and going somewhere else.
And you may know the answer to this, or you may not. Does a driver, if Wendy drives past the school bus and she doesn't get the citation, does she get a warning?
We'd have to know for sure. We'd have to talk with MIPD about that. Okay. My understanding is that, as Superintendent Plano just referenced, it's very heavily scrutinized. So there are many events that will trigger the camera. But the company, it starts there with the company. They review this and they say, no, that's never going to get a citation. They don't even send it on to MIPD. The ones they do send on to MIPD, then those are actually reviewed by an officer, and he looks and he says, no, that doesn't really meet our criteria. And then those get thrown out. So it works its way down from hundreds of events to these 33 and 25 citations, which isn't a lot. You can look online, and there's actually little videos on this company's website that shows you how it actually works. It's fascinating, and they do a good job. The cameras are great, and then there's an actual video camera on the back corner of the bus that's videotaping the entire event. So a person couldn't say, well, I was in a parking lot. It shows that they actually drove right through the bus stop paddle when it was extended. So it's pretty foolproof. And a person can, if they get a citation, they can actually log in online, and they can see themselves driving through the stop paddle camera. And I've been told that like 100% of those get paid because you can't argue it. You're caught.
Well, thank you very much. It's just an awesome program, and
Yeah,
thanks for managing
great.
it so
Thank
well.
you.
Other questions of anyone? Okay. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. I see I-90 and mobility update is the next item here.
Lost Dave.
I'm sorry?
He's being mobile.
We lost Dave.
So, Julie, are you giving this? How are we doing this?
My pleasure, too. For the record, Julie Underwood, City Manager. Delighted to be here at my first of hopefully many joint board and city council meetings. I-90, obviously a lot has happened and a lot continues to happen, but to update everyone, remind everyone, there are actually 3 lawsuits happening. So one is the lawsuit initiated by the city, breach of contract. There's no hearing on that. In fact, I want to thank Dr. Plano for really helping the city and by providing a declaration because clearly we believe there are going to be very significant impacts through our school zones and our local neighborhood streets. So his testimony, very helpful. So thank you. The other 2 lawsuits initiated, one by Sound Transit, really opposed to the city's suspension of the substantial shoreline development permit. Disappointed that the judge, in fact, did issue Sound Transit's request for an injunction and more or less prohibits us from doing that. So, not looking so good at the moment with that. The other lawsuit initiated by Sound Transit in WashDOT is also seeking the court's help in prohibiting the city from issuing the moratoria and really more or less asking the court to make sure the city moves forward with the station's building permit. The decision, we anticipate that decision to come out tomorrow. Not sure which way that's going to go. Judge Andrus was waiting for the council to make some decisions on Monday night, which they did, and they in fact modified the interim P-zone regulation to include light rail. I know there's a lot of confusion out there about that, and I apologize, I can't get into a lot of the strategy around why, because it is really part of our litigation. So, but nevertheless, council did authorize that, did approve that, and so that's happening. In the meantime, earlier this month, we received from Sound Transit and WashDOT a SEPA addendum. So some of you may know that we are seeking a supplemental EIS. However, Sound Transit issued a SEPA addendum. We just received it. Likewise, a mobility study was also issued. Not at all to our surprise, the agencies have noted that the impacts to our residents are really insignificant and can be mitigated. So we're evaluating that. We certainly believe we will probably have some, obviously, disagreements around those assumptions, and believe that there will be significant impacts just based on how we understand our island performs on our local streets. So something else that's happening in the meantime, Representative Claiborne is very, very busy in Olympia trying to protect our interests as well. She has a budget proviso. It's currently in the House budget that would more or less grandfather the Island Crestway access for single occupant vehicles. this is so critical to, as many of you know, to our town center, to have all the single occupant vehicles not be able to access that on-ramp is just, in my mind, just kind of remarkable that that's even considered. So she is working very, very hard on our behalf to, on the one hand, that buys us some time. A budget proviso is, in fact, only good for 2 years, but hopefully this buys us some time that the council can seek a political solution in Washington, D.C., and hopefully locally. And then we are resuming talks, negotiations with Sound Transit. I know we're in litigation, but I think at the end of the day, a couple things. Our council supports the light rail Eastlink project. In fact, Mercer Island voters passed that. So we're very, very reluctant to go against our voters and oppose that project. So there is support for the Eastlink project. So just lay that out there. And litigation is really expensive, very expensive, and we do have funding for that. But I think all along we anticipated that the litigation would kind of be a forcing function to bring all the parties to the table to really force us to negotiate a solution. And really it comes down to, obviously, admitting that there are going to be impacts to us and providing sufficient mitigation, and those things are around addressing our local streets and making those improvements on our local streets, intra-island transit, access, you name it. It's all those things, and hopefully there are 3 of our council members. So Jeff, Dan, and Debbie will be representing the city council. And then there are 3 Sound Transit Board members, the board chair and the 2 vice chairs representing Sound Transit Board. So they meet on Monday, and we are very hopeful that we'll produce really something that our community will accept. So that's kind of all of that in a nutshell. Any questions that... Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yes, the council acted also on Monday evening to direct the staff to file a motion to appeal the decision that the judge recently issued, and also to seek a review directly to the state Supreme Court. So.
We're passing the hat for people who want to stay for the litigation. We'll be done at the end of the meeting.
Well, but in a no surprises fashion, too, the council is contemplating raising the utility tax for a 2-year period to try and cover some of these costs of litigation. So that's staff's working on working out a proposal to bring back to council at our next meeting. Surely there are questions.
Just say thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
I'll ask 2 questions, and one is, I did see in the Seattle Times like a month ago that I think the city of Seattle is now being given the opportunity to purchase the King County Metro site near the convention center. And I kind of think it's not very totally analogous, but our park and ride, is there any way for Sound Transit to transfer that to the city and to utilize mitigation fees to essentially get that? And that's one. And then the other thing is just noting that Rainier Valley got 50 million, UW got either 30 or 60 million. Bellevue got a big expensive tunnel. What can we learn from what these guys have done in order to get these type of mitigation dollars when they're not really even losing access? and right now we don't have mitigation dollars, and we're losing a lot right now. So those two loaded questions, sorry.
I'm not going to get very far on those, but staff, I think, is working on a brief that would compare these other cities' circumstance to our own, because I think there's a belief that there may be an apples to oranges comparison rather than apples to apples comparison that gets made between the circumstance in other cities and our own. Julie, do you know where we stand with putting together that brief?
Yes, thank you. I believe our city attorney will hopefully have that available, I'm hoping this week, but before the end of the week or early next. It really obviously isn't a direct comparison, but I think it at least starts to lay out what did these other jurisdictions get in the way of some mitigation, and it does, I think, inform that process for sure. So I'm hoping to have that available soon.
I mean, I think that's part of an answer to the question. It's not. It doesn't answer the question. It tells you that we're working on trying to get an answer to the question. The other, you asked about buying the facility. I think we've been pointed towards legal language that makes clear that the agency has the authority to transfer facilities to a local jurisdiction if they deem it. I'm not sure appropriate's the right word, but as mitigation for impact. So the authority exists to do that, but in the next breath, I have to point out that their study created by them, no surprise to us, says in their estimation we have no loss of mobility, so they owe us zero. So that gets immediately to the question of us doing our own work, and that's in process too.
Oh, yes, in fact, were you going there? That we're going to work on our own, actually SEIS. So a supplemental environmental impact statement. So now that we have these documents, we can study those, evaluate those, and of course make our own findings regarding the impacts. And so we are going to do that. I will have to come back to the council for more appropriation, but I'm pretty confident they will support that.
Thank you. Someone else? All right, that brings us, it looks like, to possible levies in 2018. Maybe Julie, Gary, or you?
Yeah, so, the district does have a levy planned, or let me say it this way. 2018 would be a normal cycle year for a levy to be put forth. So the board would typically, in a calendar, approve a proposition at around September, maybe the first meeting in October, to give the committees time to assemble. So if I were looking at, potentially any board member could weigh in too, the district has mostly used February, which is a school election month, and it did one time use April, at least in my 10 years as superintendent, where we failed to bond. But April is a typical time, but the district did use in prior years November. That was a year, I believe, one of the bonds in the 90s was placed on a ballot. So, having said all of that, 2018 is typically a year on the calendar for a renewal.
Yes, and in fact, I know the council had considered potential property tax measure for this November, but I think given everything on the city's plate and the community's plate, I-90, residential development code, I think prudently they said let's address these issues and work with our community on potential levy. And so I'll be looking for community volunteers who would love to serve on a city's financial advisory committee, probably looking to gather volunteers maybe late summer. If in fact the advisors say, yes, you should do this, we would most likely be looking to bring that to the council for a decision by, I want to say, November timeframe, because we would be looking, just like the district, at a February or April timeframe. So it's possible we may share a ballot. Not sure yet. Again, I really am not sure. I really want to listen to what the community advises and kind of their thoughts before really making a recommendation then to the city council. But one thing that I think is really interesting that Ralph said was we're not a rich district, and likewise we are not a rich city, despite the fact we have our total assessed value as a community is, I believe, $12 billion. So all of our property on the island is assessed at around $12 billion. My previous city of Shoreline, Washington, was $6 billion, and that community is twice the size of this community. So because we have a lot of wealth as far as property wealth and that sort of thing, but as far as we have the lowest tax rate in King County, we just don't have deep pockets. So we are at a point in time where no one wants to go out for a tax measure. No one really wants to do that. But unfortunately, I think we're at a point, and based on my review of our financial condition, maybe where we have to seek some of that relief from our community. Not sure, but our community will support that. But I think we're at a place, and I think ultimately that's really what the voters want. They want to say and they want to decide, and I think that's, we just might be at a place financially where we have to ask.
Questions?
The only thing I would add is that often the filing period for the February election is early December. And so when you think about that, there are a number of things that have to be in play for a campaign committee to be put together. So you'll want to give yourself as much time as you can, which is why boards have previously been months ahead to give the campaign committees time to assemble. September. It would be usually the first or second, the first meeting in October at the very latest. That way the campaign teams have ample time to they have to raise money, and they have a lot of logistics, and often the time between Thanksgiving and the end of the calendar year are not the optimal times, but there's work that has to happen. So you need the infrastructure sort of built in. So be thinking about that as you plan for your levies.
What's the school district levy?
Which is the school district?
If everyone is a renewal of...
It's an M&O levy, maintenance and operations. Right.
To mention the importance, that provides 37% of our funding. So.
And this is a renewal. We did this last in 2014. So we'll do it every 4 years in a similar way, pretty much like clockwork. Modulo McCleary decisions coming out from this, obviously.
It's a tax of 37%, so it provides 37 divided by 137% of our funding.
So actually that raises an interesting question. Given what we anticipate or don't anticipate coming from Olympia, is there any incentive for the school district to change the date, expedite the date, extend the date, meaning of any levy? Is there a sense that something might come from Olympia that says, thou shalt not do anything more with levies? I don't know.
No, nothing that's coming out of the legislature would eliminate local levy. I think there's some proposals that would roll it back to either 24 or even lower than that amount. So, but every district would have the ability to raise local funds to enrich basic education. So I'm fairly certain I mean, if I'm a betting person, I would be betting that Mercer Island residents will be getting a ballot to support their local schools for February.
And I just want to stress again how critical this is, because as Ralph mentioned earlier, this is what takes us from place number 293 to place number 209. So it's probably our most essential levy.
And the levy's a 50% plus one vote. So it is not a supermajority. And we have passed this levy historically in the high 60s or up to mid 70s. So and it used to be a supermajority, and Mercer Island still would come in with a 70+% yes vote. And even though it's a simple majority, the last time, which was a simple majority, was about a 74% yes. It's in the high 70s where this community says we are willing to tax ourselves to benefit schools. What the average tax bill would be for the school, I don't offhand. Dean's shaking his head as well. The tax bill is fairly complicated, given the layers of tax that we have as a resident of King County. When you consider all the layers of taxing authorities, we're one of the most taxed communities in our country, even if you think of when you compare us to other counties in the country. So there's lots of layers of tax.
You're saying we're one of the most taxed in terms of the number of different taxes? Because we're not one of the most taxed in terms of
the number of taxing authorities.
Yeah.
Taxing districts, taxing authorities.
It's important to keep that.
That is a very. Thank you for allowing me to clarify. But you're correct. We are not the most taxed in terms of real dollars that get sent on.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we're quite low, right? If you are of a upper middle class income, we're ranked near the bottom, and if you are of low income, we rank near the top, unfortunately, which just points out the regressivity of the tax structure we face here.
Right on.
Just for information, I just quickly found on our website that the M&O levy from 2014 said it was 6 cents per $1,000 of assessed property value. So for a Mercer Island property with an assessed value of $1 million, it would result in an increase of about $60 per year.
Six cents. 6 cents sounds quite low.
That was the increase. Right. She didn't give us the total.
Sorry.
Okay,
yes.
You're at $2 and something, I thought.
No, we're 177. I believe it's once in the 170s, but that's retiring bonds. That's considering the capital levy, the M&O levy, the transportation vehicle. Right. So we're trying to maintain a steady rate over all of the years that we're retiring bonds.
Question about the... Sorry, Tracy, were you...
Go ahead.
Just a question about the mental health counselors and the funding. They're funded through 2000... Debbie, you told me that 2019? 18. Okay.
I'm just going to look at Julie to make sure, because when we approved the biennium budget, it was for calendar year 17, calendar year 18. So they'd be funded through December of 18.
Great.
Based on our current budget.
So really fully funding of the 17-18 school year. So one more academic year of funding with a partial calendar year, which is a dilemma, when you think about it.
So in order to fund 19, we would have to have...
Calendar year
school year 19.
18, 19.
Okay, straighten me out here.
So 17, 18
are covered.
Is this year coming up. We're covered.
Okay.
And you have authority to fund your counselors through calendar year 18.
Okay.
So that takes us into that first part of that new academic year. 18-19. So we have one more year of your full funding of our counselors, one more academic year.
So maybe this is a council
So
question.
I'd say we have 20 more months of funding.
And so when would we need to have our bond measure on the ballot in order to continue the continuity of funding? I know it's a little math class.
Well, the biennium, our biennium, we renew the budget every 2 years. So the budget comes up again in just, roughly a year and a half.
And there won't be a gap, I guess.
No, well, I mean, what we've done historically is it's always been just funded through the city's normal budget. It hasn't been funded through any special bond or levy or anything else. It's always just come from the general fund. So if we choose to continue down that path, then we continue to choose to go down that path. And the question would not come before us again until we come up with the next biennium budget, which is 18 months from now. The point being, there's 20 more months of school counselors funded at this point.
Got it. Thanks.
Anything else?
I think, well, to hire the staff, though, for our 2018-2019 school year, we would need to know by spring of 2018 if we have the funding, either through your traditional model or through a levy, correct?
Yeah, that's a very good point. By the spring of 18, so in one more year, so this time next year, I think the school district, the school superintendent would want to know if there will be school counselors, particularly at the elementary schools, because that's the place where there are no district-funded counselors. The only counselors we have at the elementary schools are city-funded counselors. So in a year, if we knew that there wouldn't be counselors, the district would likely then move to a traditional or which we call ESA certified counselor that would not be of the mental health type in order to serve students, but would be able to provide counseling or intervention services to students. So I don't, although I can't predict what he or she would do, I'm thinking if I were in that chair, I wouldn't want to have a school not have some type of a counselor that students and families could go to, which is a fairly typical staffing model around the country, around our community. So a year from now would be a good sort of a deadline point at which the district would need to know if they need to create some budget capacity to be able to hire 4 counselors. Does that make sense?
And a year from now would be next April or May.
Yes.
The
Right.
levy would be February. So for Julie's benefit, we've been talking about this for a year and a half. I don't know if you've heard or read about this. Sorry. So the question is, would the city go ahead and put a levy forward to pay for the school counselors? And if so, would it be a standalone or would we put other things on it? Would it be 2 levies? And that's part of that conversation for you to consider with the citizen group.
Exactly, Wendy, that's right.
All right. Feels like we're at the end point. I have a practical question to ask Julie. Do you know, are we ending this meeting, starting another meeting, or are we continuing this meeting for? Yes, but is that a new? Do I adjourn for the council's purposes? Okay. So I know the school board's going to carry on, but for our purposes, all right. So we're going to take a recess as a council then, and we will reconvene. That's 7 downstairs in the EOC to continue our meeting, and leave you to your own devices and to serve the public up here. So, thank you all.
Yeah, we'd like to say thank you to Gary Plano. This is his last meeting with the City Council and School Board in joint session. So thank you very much, Dr. Plano, for helping facilitate this and maintaining such a great relationship between the city and the school, and keeping all your board members on track, and keeping this relationship friendly with prickly board members. So I think a lot of credit to you, Dr. Plano, for making this happen.
I certainly, on behalf of the city, I would echo that and maybe say it even more heartily. Not that we have any prickly council members, but Nothing but love here. So, thank you. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and you've done a wonderful job. So you're going to be missed. So, yeah.
And are we recessed?
And with that.